former US Central Command Senior Enlisted Leader. He's also served as the 10th Mountain Division Command Sergeant Major in Afghanistan. He's got multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, a proven combat leader, a well-respected military man around the world, but also now a well-respected businessman. Chris Greca. Chris, welcome to the show, brother.
Well, John, thank you for that very kind introduction. Everybody who's listening out there, thanks for joining us. I think this will be a great discussion on a couple guys' perspectives on what's going on, and again, I wrote on a Facebook or a LinkedIn post, the intent of this is not to be overly critical of, our senior civilian leaders or anybody else out there, but it is to identify, we learn from things like this. We often said, John, that we would never have another Saigon. And, unfortunately, there was photos coming out of Afghanistan that looked very similar to Saigon, and how we get in this position. And I think it's worth the discussion, especially from the lens of a couple of senior enlisted folks like us who represented a population of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that have skin in the game. And a lot, their question to me are, did it matter? Did our service and our sacrifice matter? So, John, thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Hey, we all know, why we went to Afghanistan. After 9/11, we went in to get Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And as you and I know, Mullah Muhammad Omar and the Taliban then, they live by this Pashtunwali code. And one of the tenets is, hey, I protect my friends and I provide, a place to stay and protection and everything. And so we didn't go in there to fight the Taliban, but we ended up fighting the Taliban. And you and I happened to be there at the same time in 2011 when we started this disciplined, orderly, protracted withdrawal from Afghanistan. If you remember,
I do.
We had 130,000 troops in country, and we had to get to 120,000 by the end of the year. And I think, what'd you have in RC South where you were at? How many?
It was 45,000. I think, John, was the number. Now, certainly some of those were, our coalition partners that we had out there, the Red Scorpions and the Black Scorpions that were supporting up in the province, as well as our Great Diggers, Australian that we had up in Turkout, and our Canadians in TFK prior to shutting down. So it certainly wasn't just U.S. unilaterally, but to your point, there was just a bunch of forces over there at the time. John, you were there at the high point of operations, at the tactical or the operational level. But to your point, there was a plan, man. There was always a plan of, however, I would say in the minds of many, don't have it be date-based, have it conditions-based.
That's what I want to get into, brother.
Yeah, please.
So just for context for our audience, I was the ISAF Joint Command Senior Enlisted Leader, the operational headquarters responsible for day-to-day combat operations and all 6 regional commands. Chris was Regional Command South, Command Senior Enlisted Leader, and the 10th Mountain Division Command Sergeant Major. So we started this disciplined, orderly, protracted withdrawal in 2011. And through the years, we continued to whittle that number down in a disciplined, orderly approach. And when I took over as the SEAC, and that was your battle space then at US CENTCOM, I think we were down to about 15,000. And then another year we went to 8,400 to eventually my last year, the number was 2,500. And through that whole time, we had kept this disciplined, orderly, protracted withdrawal that continued to allow the Afghan government to grow, even though, corruption is a big issue. But the Afghan security forces, an Afghan army, and now an Afghan Air Force was continuing to get after the mission. And when we got down to 2,500, we had a counterterrorism force that was there to continue to get after high value targets whether it was Taliban, ISIS, or Al Qaeda or whatever. And then the vast majority of the other troops that were there were doing advise and assist missions. And then through the use of ISR and joint fires and logistics and intelligence, we continue to assist the Afghan forces. My first question to you, brother, 14 April, the president said, we're leaving.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, in my opinion, we went from this disciplined, protracted, orderly withdrawal, and all of a sudden, it became an undisciplined, disorderly, precipitous exit. And then at a certain point, we started calling this a non-combatant evacuation operation.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that in NEO, you take out American citizens, you take out host nation or host country nationals that helped us, you take out third country nationals that have helped us and want to leave, then you take out equipment, then you take out the troops, and we kind of did it backwards. So your thoughts on all of this and where we're at now, brother?
Yeah, John, I could have said that better, man. So, okay, theater provided equipment. You interestingly provided a list of all this equipment that fell into the laps of our Afghan National Security Forces as we were attempting to man, train, and equip. And that equipping piece, I remember as a CENTCOM Sergeant Major, what were we going to do with equipment? And people have to remember when we had 120,000 U.S. servicemen and women over there, we had 120,000 sets and types of equipment to sustain not only the individual, but their formations as well. When people came back to the United States of America, listen, we called it theater provided equipment. And the expectation was, as an organization rolled in, that there would be the shoot, move, and communicate types of equipment and platforms for people to fall in on. Eventually, we withdrew so quick, John, that equipment just, we called it Operation Drumbeat, and it was to figure out what pieces of equipment should go back to the United States of America using multimodal types of, that was air trains going up through the stands on the north side.
What years was this, Chris?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what years was this?
2014 through it when I was at CENTCOM. It was called Operation Drumbeat, John. And those people that came into country, they weren't counted against your force management levels or the maximum number, because they were there just to concentrate on equipment.
So this was part of the orderly withdrawal.
Absolutely. So the expectation was, when this finally got to this point, that the Taliban wouldn't be running around in our body armor and weapon systems, right, platform, helicopters that they don't know how to use, but that's still now in their inventory. So, John, I'll tell you, conditions-based. Remember, the Secretary Austin was my boss at US Central Command. We had a lot going on with the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, Iraq and Syria, which as they franchised, became the Islamic State of the Khorasan province over in Afghanistan. So I think people need to understand that the complexities of the AOR. Now, this whole NEO thing, John, not to talk too much, it's been chaos, right? And certainly there's two big factors. Is it permissive or is it a restrictive environment? We recall back to Grenada, we jumped forces in and we fought the Cubans in order to NEO American doctors and students that were located down there. I think we have the forces in, to your point. I think we did it ass backwards, again, not to be overly critical. The one thing I would say is, if you messed it up, just admit to it, man. That's been my frustration over this, is somebody needs to stand up at the podium, in my opinion, John, and just say, hey, we screwed this up, man. There's no reason for it. But that being said, we have taken steps to fix it. So,
you and I both, I saw your post on LinkedIn, and I did one across several social media platforms that said the same thing. And it was about the blame game.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we all know from a military context or wherever, the minute you enter into a job and you now hold that position, you own it.
Absolutely.
And I don't
Uh,
care if you're, a manager at the PX or you're the president of the United States. When you move in, you own it.
That's
And
right.
so
Absolutely.
stop trying to play rugby with the blame game and just say, hey, look, we screwed this up. Now,
Yeah.
you and I both, as you just mentioned, Secretary Austin and General Milley, you and I know them both very well. We've
Yeah.
both served with them in combat. Secretary Austin was our brigade commander back
Yep.
in the 90s. General Milley, we served with multiple times in combat. He was my boss for my last 4 months as the SEAC. When I see those two decorated warriors at the podium and knowing them like I know them and looking at their body language, I can tell. And then Chairman Milley used some words that when he said this was a policy decision on one of the answers he gave, it would be a policy decision to change some things. And then he also said, when he said, hey, there'll be enough time for AARs later, the General Milley I know, he is saying through his language, and that is, we know this was a fucked up plan.
Yeah.
We gave our
Yeah.
best military advice to the president of the United States. He went another direction. And being the great and awesome leaders they are that you and I know, when the boss said, the president said, we're going to do this, they owned it. And,
Yeah.
and they walked
Yeah.
away and said, we're going to speak in the first person, we're going to speak in one voice, and we're going to get after the plan that we have to get after now. Your
Yeah,
thoughts?
John, I like you cringed a little bit. I mean, through numerous press conferences and whatever, because to your point, knowing, and I think everybody listening to this, or as if you share it, General Milley and Secretary Austin are just two guys who are doing what they believe in terms of their recommendations to the president and others. But ultimately, the POTUS is the ones making decisions. I think in hindsight, John, taking out General Miller and Tim Matheny, his command senior enlisted leader, and shutting that command down, giving Bath back, Bogger Merrifield, when they did, when it could have been utilized as a hub to take people out, and thinking that Kia was the only answer, or was a logical solution at the time, given the security situation in the country. That 11 days, the collapse from east to west, north to south of Afghan National Security Forces, and having the Taliban driving on perimeter road on the outside, it just didn't go well, John. I mean, let's call it like it is. All the predictions and the analysis that came down, worst case scenario. Me and you learned, man, what, when you do a plan, most dangerous course of action, what is it? That's what you're always planning for. And dude, I just, John, I have cringed watching this whole thing. I mean, it's awkward because I know him, and it's just, again, man, yeah, we'll have plenty of time to look at this, but we've neoed. When I heard the term neo, I neoed throughout the 1990s prior to 9/11.
The 80s and 90s, that's what we trained for all the time. Yeah.
We were neoing, man. We were neoing, and certainly the State Department and our interagency brothers and sisters have part of this as well in terms of identifying those two neo out of the country. But listen, from a whole of government perspective, John, I think we've screwed this up a little bit. I mean, to put it bluntly, I think we're making it right. I know one of the brigade commanders on the ground in his organization right now. We have the right people on the ground to assist, but brother, we know in 7 days, man, a lot of stuff can happen. And the president, I think today, said 7 days we're done. He drew that magical line on the 31st. But dude,
to your point, it's a set date. It's not conditions based.
Correct.
So I think I agree with you. I think when we go down that road, only bad things can happen. All right. Yeah. We're going to go to the audience right quick for a question, Chris, because I don't want to, they're all coming in. Yeah. So I'm going to start with Don Obanauf. I hope I pronounced your name right. You gave two questions. If you can unmute your mic and ask one of those questions, Don, go ahead. Is he able to do that, Vic? Yeah, there you go, Don. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Good evening. Honored to take part. Just talking with a lot of friends that were there, and what first came to mind is why didn't we maintain control of Bagram and even Jabad and in Kabul for that matter. I'm not familiar with Kabul, but Bagram alone could hold 50,000 people, and it just seems that could have made the process much easier to control. So.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with you. When I saw Secretary Blinken kind of talking about, hey, we needed to protect the embassy, so we decided to go with Kabul International Airport as the one we would use and everything. And my thought was, well, why not move the embassy to Bagram? And all of you, obviously, Don and Chris, I know Bagram has got a lot of standoff out there. It's kind of isolated, and it's got two large runways. And as you described, it could house upwards of 50,000 people. So my thought would have been, and I am confident that between the chairman and the SecDef, they were providing those kinds of courses of action. But in the end, we went in the opposite direction. So I think it would have been a much more fluid operation out of Bagram, much more standoff, much more secure, and the ability maybe not to, prevent Taliban from having the outside area, but, it would be a lot easier to have eyes on them. As as we all know, there's nothing but really just open ground out there. So Chris, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, hey Don, great to have you on here. Yeah, hindsight being 2020, man, Chris Greca is a great backseat driver, and I will tell you from backseat driving this thing, that BAF calf absolutely makes sense. I mean, when you're neoing, and again, me and John were talking about this, neoing in a built-up area. Now you've added a level of complexity with the thousands of people that are outside the walls that down in BAF, it would have been a little bit easier to identify potentially those with some type of hostile intent. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. However, the decision was made. And as me and John talked about, I mean, the collapse, I read an interesting article, I think it was in the Washington Post, but they were talking about the sequence of events and how this whole thing unfolded. And in the best military advice of the secretary and others, they thought that closing BAF sequentially and leaving a small presence at the embassy, pulling out and then getting out there would work. It just obviously has not, without a little bit of, or a lot of chaos.
Hey, Don, go ahead and ask your other question now that we got you on the air, brother. Go ahead.
I think this probably goes back, several months, to the previous administration, but it just seems why not wait until the fighting season is over, let winter set in and negate the Taliban's ability to maneuver?
That's a phenomenal question. I think, I think the initial date was May, and that would have been right at the beginning of the fighting season. But I agree with you. Why would we wait till the heart of the fighting season? Why not wait till the winter? Those mountain passes close, the fighters kind of go away and everything. I don't have an answer for you, brother. Chris,
Don and John, man, what a phenomenal question. I think it was brought up. I watched it on one of the news agencies, but for those of us that have been over there, and I know you have as well, Don, we know about the fighting season. We know how that works. We know how, in the winter that they go to pass and go take care of their family and everything else, and they come back in the spring and summer months. So, that's a great question that you would hope that our military advisors, those on the Joint Staff and others, brought up when they were making their best recommendation to the president. So great question, Don.
Hey, thanks for your insights, Don. Okay, Chris, I'm going to go on to another point, and we got other questions that are standing by, and we'll get at them here shortly. Um, Chris, so you mentioned it. I posted a list of all equipment that had been issued to the Afghan National Army and Afghan Air Force. I'm not saying all of that equipment is in the hands of the Taliban right now, but this is the list of equipment that potentially the Taliban could have their hands on. I am betting that some of that equipment is in the hands of Ahmed Shah Massoud's son now, who him and his band of fighters are back in their old stomping grounds in Panjshir province. They've taken 3 districts back in Baghlan further to the north. But your thoughts on this kind of equipment, and especially when we start talking biometrics, we start talking Scan Eagles, Black Hawk helicopters, C-130 transports, A-29 aircraft, all of this list of stuff that potentially is in the Taliban's hands. Your thoughts?
Yeah, John, it clearly isn't good, man, and not good from the perspective of, there's other countries out there that could put their hands on that equipment and either, figure out what that equipment is, how it works, and specifically I'm talking about the Chinese, the Iranians, and others that are in that theater of operations. So Taliban man doesn't necessarily need to know how to operate those pieces of equipment, and maybe they just sell it to others. My second point, John, would be, we've seen this before, man, where equipment has fallen into the hands of, for example, the Iraqi security forces, yet they don't understand how to tactically employ the equipment. So I got it. They've got our nods. They got night vision capability. They've got things at the individual level that really can turn individuals into a lethal fighting force, day or night, limited visibility, doesn't matter. But you've got to know how to employ the equipment. And I'm confident that I got it. They're running around and they're taking those happy snaps looking like they're putting the Islamic flag the same way as Iwo Jima. My best military bet would be that they don't know how to use any of that shit that they've got there. So now listen, is that going to last forever? No. And they'll
So
eventually.
to your point, yeah.
Yeah.
So to your point, so ISI from Pakistan, potentially China, potentially the Russians. What about,
absolutely,
that they could potentially move in and try to, especially China and Russia, in terms of this long-term power competition. And then China, as you know, the 100-year marathon, with all those precious gems in those mountains that haven't been mined because of all the fighting and everything. And I put a post on the other day where, the Taliban kind of minister of defense was visiting with his Chinese counterpart in Beijing. So they may not be able to use it now, but the ability to learn and how to employ
that. Absolutely, John. Yeah. And my other point to this would be that, as you're talking about Massoud and others to the north, any resistance that they might have gotten from the Mujahideen, it's going to become that much more difficult when they have body armor. So now, hey, you got to shoot them with a controlled pair in the face, or get them in one of those body parts. So listen, it's going to make it that much more difficult for any force to go back in there, whether they actually know how to tactically employ that stuff correctly. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's just we make life a whole lot more difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah. All right, Chris, we're going to go back to the audience for another question, and we're going to get our brother, Duke Durkin, arguably the hardest Ranger to have ever served in the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yes.
Duke, our brother, come on, man. Unmute your mic and give us your question, brother. Go ahead, Duke.
He's trying to figure out how to unmute himself. Trust me.
Well, he's unmuted. Waiting around for Duke Durkin to talk is like leaving the porch light on for Jimmy Hoffa. Hey, Duke, I'm going to go ahead and answer your question or ask your question here. I think we've got problems with the mic, but so Duke says a little bit of history. When he was the C-Cell for US 4A, which he was from January 2009 to April 2010. We were building the ring road, 1 hour evac, fobs, etc. Any troops in contact engaged, we demanded, General McDonald, no equipment be left behind, as the Soviets did. In our creed, we never leave anyone behind, and if needed, zero and or destroy, so no enemy, hold on, so no enemy could use against us. We have all seen it, and not being the Monday morning QB, which we've already talked about, but where has that senior NCO mentorship gone? I know our brother, Jerry, did this all he could with our brother Scotty. I believe he's talking about Tim Matheny. Yet
Yeah.
we don't know what just happened. I have often said we would come back to the forces we joined after Vietnam. Is it time to do what Abrams did in 73, 74? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Duke is bringing up things, man, from his, observation. Well, it is an observation. I mean, Duke lived this. He was on the ground, and, we
Yeah.
had this thought process and this mentality that we were properly equipping people. And again, so it was putting the right equipment in the right hand, the right time, in the right place. And, to Duke's point, nobody foresaw this thing. John, you talk about this orderly withdrawal. We thought we had the plan. Now, listen, Bill Thedford, who's a hell of a lot smarter than I'll ever be, was the guy who backfilled me. Remember, you've had, from a subunified command perspective, you've had a 4-star in his command senior enlisted leader, Tim Matheny, Del Byers, my great friend Booker, Jim Booker. I mean, all these guys have been over there giving advice. So, Duke, to your point, and not to avoid the question, man, I think that in everybody's mind, the intent was not to leave this equipment behind to fall into the hands of a force that, Taliban, man. So,
yeah, and I would just say that I'm sure between Tim Matheny, Jamie Hurdell at CENTCOM, and CZ, they were providing best advice to all of their 4-stars, and on CZ's part to the Secretary of Defense on a direction they should go.
Yeah.
Okay. But then when you weigh.
And John, I think people need to remember.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think people need to remember, John, that Secretary Austin was the CENTCOM commander. And I'm going to tell you that this is really, really important for people to understand that, I'm not downplaying previous secretaries and everything else, but that guy sat in that seat when the Islamic State rolled through northern Iraq, heading towards Baghdad, and stopped it in between Iraq and Syria, and then simultaneously Afghanistan, resolute support going on in trying to deal with these force management levels, John. And I know as the SEAC, you heard a lot about this. You would get kind of numbers put out. Hey, no more than 1,000 people, for example, in Syria at one given time. And what would frustrate me as a senior enlisted guy is I would often think, hey, just tell us what the requirements is. Don't put a number on it. Say, hey, you need to go into Syria, as an example, have a over the horizon capability, establish an airfield, whatever. And if the SOCOM commander came back and said, sir, Mr. President, that number is 1,113 people. Got it. You can have 1,113, not some random ass number of 1,000, for example, or 900 or 800. And my frustration in Afghanistan, John, sometimes would be, it almost appeared that the number was what was important and not the capability. Tell us what the capability is. If that number is 2,500, John, 5,000, 35, 1,113, so be it.
Yeah. So I agree. And, here's what I would say to all of that, Duke. I think that all the senior enlisters up through the chain gave the right, I'm confident CZ gave the right best military advice. And the options that were given from the secretary and the chairman, both off of predictive analysis with our 17 intelligence agencies, these options were given to the commander in chief, the president. And the president, I think, made a decision on a date and a political decision, not on conditions based. And here's where we're at now, you know? So Duke, thanks for the question. All right. Chris,
Hey, John,
yeah, go ahead.
remember, campaign promises are a funny thing, man. And just,
Yeah.
this is just Chris Greca talking aloud. And what I would say is, a guy who's running for president, it's really easy to say, hey, the right answer is we're going to withdraw all US forces out of Afghanistan. And then what happens is, like Obama, is they get in the seat and they figure out, shit, I can't do this. They're, from a national security perspective, well, I can do this, do anything. But it's just unwise for a multitude of reasons, like violent extremist organizations reconstituting and whatever. So others got in the seat and said, shit, although I can withdraw and take the number down, I still have to possess requirement or this capability overseas. Smart,
I agree.
smart presidents, man, they kind of, you don't know what you don't know, man, and they get in the seat.
Well,
like,
hey, I was, again, I'm not going to make this a political conversation, but that was a campaign promise of Trump.
Yeah.
He said, hey, I'm going to get us out of these endless wars. I'm going to get you out of Afghanistan. He didn't know what he didn't know. He came in, and then when twice, Secretary Mattis went to him and said, hey, look, we need to stay. And both times he conceded we needed to stay. Now, after I left, shortly thereafter, he made this deal with the Taliban, that, hey, we're going to get out in May of 21 and everything. But the point being is, if a good leader listens to the experts, and the experts in the Defense Department, obviously, are the Secretary of Defense, the chairman, and the combatant commanders, service chiefs, and those senior staffs at OSD and the Joint Staff.
Absolutely.
And so I just think he was so focused on eliminating everything from the previous administration that this was something I am going to jump on my sword for,
Hey, John, and to everybody listening, is Chris Greca's personal opinion, your sacrifice in service was worth it. I've been getting asked a multitude of questions, and what I would say is there has not been a significant attack on U.S. soil in 20 years. 20, not a year, not 5 years, not 10 years. 20 years we have not had a significant attack. So if anybody ever
wait a minute, so we have not had a planned, prepared, exported, and executed spectacular terrorist attack. We have had inspired attacks, in places like Orlando nightclub and San Bernardino, and in New Jersey and places like that. But those were Americans that were inspired by this radical ideology.
John, absolutely.
But we have not had an attack exported from Afghanistan or Yemen or Somalia or Syria or any place like that in 20 years. And it's because of presence, performance, and persistence by the great men and women of our military, as well as our allies and partners and our host nation forces, brother.
Oh, John, absolutely, man. And I will tell you, that lack of I had at E. Angus, I went and spoke at the Enlisted Association National Guard. And that was my message was, and by the way, that includes our citizen soldiers, right, who had to throw the rucksack on their back because we're just not big enough. But I said, we have not had a spectacular exported friggin' attack. I said, and why? I'm telling you, if you've lost a son or a daughter, a husband or wife, brother or sister, I think some of these politicians that have gotten on the news and said, I would have got us out 5 or 10 years ago. Well, what you're telling me was, now listen, the deterrent factor is hard to prove. All right. It's just a hard thing. But I'm telling you, we've been on the balls of our feet versus the heels. And when we withdraw all U.S. forces, or at least out of I know we'll have a regional presence that's there. Listen, US CENTCOM existed. Our number one mission was to protect the homeland. And I would say that every geographic combatant command, protect the homeland. And how do you do that? By standing on the balls of your feet abroad geographically, to support. And that's my message, John. And I'll tell you, I'm
Yeah.
sticking to this hard. I got a lot of young men and women asking me the question, Sergeant Major, I'm having a tough time with this. And I said,
Yeah. Hey, so the other thing I would to add on to that. So, we had a battle buddy of ours reach out and say, hey, I'm going to put this in some of my groups, to let them know what was going on. And so I went to one of those groups and I looked at some of the comments that were on there. And some of the comments were like, hey, the president made a decision, get over it. Or why are we even having this conversation or anything? And then as people would message me, and criticize that you and I were going to do this, or criticize that I'm going public and talking about my criticism of the administration's precipitous withdrawal and everything. What I noticed out of most of these people, they didn't have skin in the game. They were some people that did not know or had never had the business end of a rifle pointed at them from an enemy combatant, or that has had to kill an enemy combatant, and worse yet, that has had to witness a beautiful American human being go from 1 minute being that beautiful American human being to, with one explosion, become a messy pile of flesh, hair, and camouflage material. And to all of those people that are questioning why veterans are saying, was it all worth it, and everything, and excuse my language, they can go fuck themselves, okay? Because it is an insult to the men and women that have served in Afghanistan for 20 years, or the men and women that have served in Iraq or any other Syria or any other place in combat, to say that they should forget all about it. The commander-in-chief made a decision, what's next? Because I think the argument and why most veterans are pissed off is, we know that Afghanistan is fertile breeding ground for terrorists. And so I'm with you, brother. Hey, I'm going to go to another quick question to another one of our battle buddies here. Ron Johnson, one of my favorite Mongadai warriors, and probably the biggest, baddest engineer on the planet. Ron, I know engineers can do better than airborne rangers in terms of unmuting their mic. So go ahead, brother, ask your question. If he's still on here, let me check him out. Yeah, he's on here. Ron, are you there? All right, let's talking permitted. Go ahead, Ron. It must be something here with our comms. So Ron is talking about hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Afghan veterans are feeling anger, frustration, sorrow, humiliation, etc. What we were just talking about.
Yep.
Is there anything vets can actually do? Not talking about crisis lines and such. Are there any organizations doing real work right now that vets can volunteer or support? Many would probably get up right now. Obviously a very bad idea. Your thoughts, brother. Thanks for the question, Ron.
Yeah. Hey, Ron, great question out there. And listen, I think the biggest support network exists on, some of these social media channels. I've had multiple individuals reach out to me. You look at LinkedIn and we see some of our Sergeant Major brothers that are out there. John shared from the Sergeant Major of the Afghan Army, Rashan, who was, the Sergeant Major of the Army, that he's been evac'd and he is in a safer and a better place. I think we just need to continue to reach out, Ron. The other thing, listen, me and John do some work for this place called the Emory Healthcare Veterans Program out of, and everybody's heard of Emory Hospital. I would encourage anybody who's, listening, if you're in crisis mode, meaning more than just need a battle buddy to talk to, which hell, they can talk to me if they don't have anybody else. But the place like the Emory Healthcare Veterans Program is a great place for those. This is interesting. I talked to Lieutenant General retired Burke Garrett this past week in regards to what these decisions are doing to our veteran population. And many, and John said it, many are confused, many are hurt, many are, God, they're just questioning, they're thinking about their lost brothers and sisters and those ones that John described. I mean, that's hard, man. That's hard. So I think what we can do as leaders is kind of, besides listening and caring, is to point them in the right direction. And a place like the Emory Healthcare Veterans Program, Ron, is is a great place to point them towards.
And Ron, I would even add, you being a well-respected senior enlisted leader, certainly a great friend of mine and battle buddy with a lot of experience in combat, just continuing to be there for our fellow veterans. You know, those that might have done one tour and spent half of that tour in combat fighting their ass off, just being there for them. And to all of our veterans, we just need to tell them it was worth it. As you described, Chris, we took a nation that the female population was 7% literate when we got in there. And over 50% of young girls and women are now literate. And a portion of those are college graduates now. Overall, the force has continued to grow and everything. As you described, we have not had an exported spectacular terrorist attack come out of Afghanistan in 20 years.
Yep.
And again, like any of these other places that we've been at, we haven't had that happen. So just be proud. And for us veterans, let's lean on each other and keep it up. And when the people out there are saying, get over it, we need to educate them and tell them, hey, look, here's why we ain't going to get over it. And especially those that don't have skin in the game, the ones that continually criticize me and Chris Greca and those like us that keep speaking out. So, all right, Chris, I'm going to go to another question here. I'm going to get in as many as we can. Get ready, brother, because the #1 fan of the Leader Talk Show, Ed Sullivan, is on board, AKA Cliffy Clavin. And if you ever watch the show Cheers, you know, you go to a place where everybody knows your name.
Yep.
Well, Ed Sullivan is the Cliffy Clavin of Cheers. And when he comes in, everybody knows the beer he wants. And what's he going to say? Ed, are you there?
I'm here, John.
Oh, and he can, hey.
We got one.
What service were you in, Ed?
I was in the Army.
Okay, good. All right. I wanted to make
Reserve
sure.
and active.
You know, I want to make sure Army guys know how to operate this equipment. So
Good to know.
Go ahead, brother. Please ask your question.
All right. This is actually a two-part question. First, I'll start with the evacuation. It's pretty simple. I've kind of been curious as to why they aren't using C5 Galaxies for the evacuation, given that those could hold considerably more people and maybe it would potentially hasten up the evacuation. And then also, you know, we've basically been at war at some level or another in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria for 20 years now. What do you believe the military should turn its focus to for the next few years with these wars finally coming to an end? And what are some lessons that the next generation of troops could learn from Afghanistan and Iraq based on your own experiences there?
So, Chris, if you don't mind, I'll jump on it first.
Yeah, please.
So, Ed, great question. I'm going to answer the second part of your question first. You know, I still do a lot with the troops, and I still do a lot of traveling to do leadership and motivational speaking and stuff like this. And whenever I engage with the community, meaning the community right outside bases or stuff like this, the prevailing message, and it's a good one and it's a wholesome one, is that the citizens of the United States just want all the troops home. They just want all the troops home and they want them out of harm's way. Well, my message to them is we live in probably the most contentious operating environment in the history of our nation. And our military not only has to be able to fight and win, but we have to compete, you know, across the elements of national power and across the whole of government against countries like China and Russia. We have to respond to crisis to countries like North Korea and Iran, who are rogue nations that on any given day, something can happen. And then certainly with terrorists, we have to be able to deny, disrupt, and neutralize them away so that we don't have to fight a home game. And so my point is, we have to be an expeditionary military. And so we have to continue to be in places that we can retain competitive advantages, deny competitive advantages of potential adversaries, deny malign activity of those countries or those entities. And so we've got to continue this expeditionary approach. And then the other thing I would say on that is, are we really at war in Afghanistan right now? Chris, you mentioned about, you know, the change from enduring freedom to resolute
Freedom
support.
Sentinel. Yeah, Freedom Sentinel.
Or I'm sorry, Freedom Sentinel. Okay. Wrong theater. But as I mentioned, we had a small counterterrorism force that was going out after high value targets. And the majority of the rest of the force was doing advise and assist. The same thing that we're doing in Iraq, and the same thing that we are doing on a limited factor in Syria. The vast majority of that is our elite special operations that are out with the Syrian Democratic Force. So I think when we define a war, what does that look like? And I get it, people keep calling it the 20-year Afghan war, but I will tell you that we're doing a lot more advising and assisting now around the world than we are actually fighting. So, and I think we have to look at this as this is the new normal of what our armed forces are doing. And especially when we have to be able to compete, respond to crisis, and ultimately fight and win, we have to have this expeditionary approach. We got to continue to deploy, to deter, to build our partners and allies and assure them, and again, protect our interests abroad so that these threats don't come home. Because I will tell you, if all of a sudden we bring all the troops home, those anti-access aerial denial areas known as the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean are gone. And the Chinese and Russians will be moving in. Your thoughts, brother, before we go to the C5 question.
Yeah, hey, Ed, and CENTCOM deterred, denied, disrupt. We had about 75,000 uniformed men and women of all branches of service that were not only protecting the homeland, but keeping the free flow of trade and commerce open through the Suez Canal, the BAM off Yemen and Somalia on the other end, and then the Straits of Hormuz. I would only say this because, and the last one is stop the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So to John's point, certainly we have nation states out there. What do I think? I think that violent extremist organizations, as you kind of look at it, certainly we've got, from a CENTCOM perspective, Iran, nobody needs to sweep them under the rug. They've got a lot of missiles and bombs and shit like that. So, and I only throw that out there to say, yeah, would we win? Absolutely. But we have to keep this forward presence, in my personal opinion, to stay on the balls of our feet versus the heels. And that's not only in Iraq and Syria, but it's in Jordan, it's in Egypt, it's in, many, many places around the CENTCOM AOR, and then globally. To your question about C5s, Ed, they break. All right. I would probably say that the planners took that into consideration when talking about capability to extract. I did a lot of airfield seizures in the day, and every airfield seizure I think I ever done, one of the C5s broke and stayed there. So it probably was a reliability issue. That's just a guess.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump on that one real quick too, Ed. Again, Chris and I are not talking on behalf of the DOD or any leader in the DOD. These are our opinions between two guys that got over 70 years of military experience, and we retired at the peak level. But I have to agree with Chris. When, as the U.S. Transportation Command commander, General Steve Lyons said, great friend of ours, great paratrooper, said every 48 minutes a C-17 is leaving HKIA with evacuees on it. Every 48 minutes. The operational rate of the C-17s is much higher than C-5s. And I would assume that had to come into the equation, and why you're seeing more C-17s than C-5s, or all C-17s and not C-5s doing the mission. So Ed, thanks so much.
I would agree. Great question.
So the question.
Very well put. Thanks a lot.
Okay, before I go to the next question here, Victoria, do we have any questions off of the social media pages?
Not right this second.
Okay, so let's go back to Don Obanoff. Don, you got another question? Please go ahead and answer it. Or ask it, I should say.
John, these are great questions, by the way. I mean these, yeah. And by the way, John, before they ask it, somebody posted on LinkedIn that it's all right to disagree. And John kind of alluded to this, that maybe there's those that are out there saying, well, why are we doing sessions like this? Listen, you hear a lot of Spider Marks and others, and I'm not saying we're Spider Marks or we're these guys, but me and John served at some fairly senior levels, and we were, we sat in the room with individuals as they were making decisions, and therefore it gives us a perspective or a lens in which we look at issues and and things that might have come up on the horizon. So please don't hate. You can disagree with us. That's okay. Chris Greca loves people that disagree. That's what makes our country great.
Awesome. Don, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, I had to step out.
Okay, go ahead, brother. You had another question?
Just wondering, are we justified to conduct airstrikes on the equipment that's there? Because I saw rows and rows of Humvees and the helicopters. I don't even know. Is it a free for all now? What's the situation?
Well, again, that would be a decision that would have to be made by the commander in chief. And it would be based off of best military advice from the Secretary of Defense and the chairman. I don't know if we will go there. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say nothing's going to happen before the 31st of August. So you don't want to, right now at HKIA, we're kind of surrounded, right? Doing this NEO. I would think don't piss off the people outside the fences, I know a lot of people are probably listening to this, or some going, Jesus Christ, man, we're dependent upon the Taliban. Well, to a certain degree, people are more important than equipment. So let's get the people out. And then I think our military leaders and others will decide after the fact what to do with that equipment done. That's a guess.
Okay. Chris.
Yes.
So where do we go from here now? We've got 31 August is the deadline. Our allies are saying, hey, look, we need to, the French and Germans and the UK are saying, hey, look, that's too short of a time and everything. Where do you think we go from here, brother?
Yeah, John, and that is a great question. Okay, so you can flip through all the news agencies, and I think that guy's, I'm trying to think of his name, the National Security Advisor. He comes out and he talks about Sullivan. I thought it was Sullivan.
Not to be confused with Edward Sullivan, but
absolutely, and that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure that Edward Sullivan's the name was kind of ringing. But anyhow, and they talk about this credible threat, and I think what people need to understand that the Taliban is not the Islamic State of the Khorasan province. They keep calling it ISIS-K or ISIL-K. But kind of when they were franchising over there in Afghanistan, listen, it's a different threat. And the Taliban man can say that he or she has the outsides he secured. But I think that threat is credible. And, for everybody listening, imagine if somebody took down one of those aircraft that was either inbound or outbound and what that would do to our plan. John, what do I think? I wish it was conditions based. However, I think the Taliban has been quite clear that the 31 August, I think our president has made 31 August a hard line. I think we're going to leave some behind. I think we've gotten a shitload out. And then I think there's going to be some, AARs that are conducted to figure out where we went right or wrong in these particular actions. So I wish I had a better answer, John.
No, I got you. So I think, Stephen Cole wrote a good book, Ghost Wars, and it was kind of talked about Afghanistan in the 80s and 90s. I think, my opinion, the Lion of the Panjshir got killed 2 days before 9/11. Yep. Supposed to do an interview with a press, and it ended up being two Al-Qaeda guys that had explosives and killed him.
Yep.
Now his son has taken up arms in the Panjshir Valley, which is, when you talk about the graveyard of empires, which is Afghanistan is called, the center for the graveyard of empires is Panjshir province, because that province has never been conquered. Yep. And anybody that's been to the Panjshir province has seen the burned out Russian order of battle all the way through that valley, where 7 times the Russians tried to come in there and take the valley from Masood and his lightly armed warriors. Obviously, with CIA provided Stinger missiles, that never hurts, you know. But then for 5 years, the Taliban tried to come in there and get him out, and they couldn't do it. So now you've got his son up there with, I don't know how many fighters he's got. He's got some equipment that was on that list. They've also taken 3 districts up in Bagland, just to the north on the other side of the Salong Tunnel and everything. So in my opinion, do we now execute Title 50 and start providing intelligence, ISR, and some kind of support to these kind of fighters to not only take the fight to the Taliban, but also continue to keep Al-Qaeda and, you know, ISIS-K focused on surviving instead of, you know, rearming, re-executing, recruiting, and being able to export terrorist attacks. Because a lot of people, the Taliban ain't going to export terrorist attacks to the United States. Yeah. But their good buddies, the Al-Qaeda, 9/11 was proven that they will. And certainly ISIS will as well, given, you know, the ability, the time and space to do it. So in my opinion, the what next is we continue to support those 6,000-ish troops on the ground. I know they are thriving in that mission and they are getting after it and everything. And they will execute it in a precise military manner. But the what next is post US exit. Will we continue to support Masood, the younger Masood and the fighters, and continue to get after some things that will disrupt Al-Qaeda and ISIS and continue to, you know, keep the Taliban in check, along with State Department efforts and others to make sure the Taliban is not doing the Sharia law kind of things that they do with, in regards to women and small children. So we'll see as it moves forward.
Yeah,
go ahead, brother.
And I will tell you, I mean, all those points that you bring up, I mean, absolutely fantastic. I think we learned post 9/11 that our human sources, when you talk about different forms of intelligence, we were lacking in the AOR, and maybe we were overly dependent on SIGINT and some other forms of intelligence and intelligence collecting. So I think, you know, we've got our partners, our other government agencies that exist out there. And I think collectively, John, and you spoke to DIME earlier, that diplomatic, information, military, and economic, and how do you use this kind of whole of government approach to tackle not only the Taliban, man, but regionally. You know, my fear is, you know, my fear is, and you brought this up earlier, you know, when I was saying no spectacular significant attack on U.S. soil. Well, it doesn't mean that there hasn't been inspired attacks. And in an age of, you know, social media and everything else that exists, man, those oceans have become really, really, really small, man. They're like a little creek now because they're not stopping the way that they specifically used to count for stuff. Now they count for shit today's. So I think it's something to keep our eyes on, John.
So we will continue to support the troops who are doing phenomenal work, not just in Afghanistan, but around the world. And to everybody watching out there, especially our veterans, I know this. Chris and I both spend a lot of time with our current force. We spend a lot of time getting after business in Washington, D.C. and other places. And I can tell you this. We are still the #1 partner of choice militarily around the world.
Absolutely.
Our partners and our allies still rely on us militarily around the world, and that's not going to change. 2, we still have competitive advantages over those kind of threats that we talked about. And the best one and the most capable one is in the human domain, where we have the best trained, best educated, and most trusted and empowered non-commissioned officer and petty officer corps around the world. Not saying anything bad about our partners and allies, but nobody does it as good as us. And so the key thing, all of this, you know, as we come to an end, Chris, is that it's not just fighting and winning our nation wars. What we do on the humanitarian side is so important. And you and I, you just mentioned our man, Rashan Safi, the former Afghan Sergeant Major of the Army and the first and only Afghan SEAC. And he's a Tajik. He was one of Masood's guys. He fought the Taliban prior to 9/11. After 9/11, being a Tajik, he was never going to be in good favor with the Pashtuns. And for 20 years, he was fighting the Taliban. So when the collapse happened, he was one of the people that they would have chopped his head off in a hurry if they got a hold of him. And there was a little touch and go there for a while, but from the work of our current SEAC, CZ Colon Lopez, Jamie Hurdell at CENTCOM, and retired Sergeants Majors Frank Grippy, Gerald Parks, too many to number. Rashan Safi is now in a refugee camp in Qatar with his family. And he sent me an audio tape, and I'd like to play it, Chris, for all of our audience to hear before we sign off here.
Absolutely. Great way to end this.
Hey, brother, thank you very much. They are inside. I want to tell you the good news, brother. Thank you for each of you. You work a lot, 24/7. You made this happen. And Gerald and everybody, Claire, all of them, all of the teams from it, especially you were telling me I can make happen, you made happen. Behalf of me, my family, my kids, you saved my life, of my family, brother. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. They are inside there with the great American soldiers.
They are inside and with the great American soldiers.
John, that makes me choke up almost in tears, man, hearing that, because you can hear the emotion in Roshan's voice. And I tell everybody out there, continue to pray for our brothers and sisters. We've still got some tremendous allies that we fought beside for the last 20 years that are stuck, for lack of a better term, or still in physically in Afghanistan. Continue to think and pray for them all. John, thanks for having me on, buddy.
Yeah, so we're going to have to cut it short. I want to say thank you to all of our audience out here today. Thank you for your participation. To those of you that tuned in on social media, thank you for being here today. And Chris, brother, I love you to death, man. I like how you got your office set up and you got the museum going there and everything. But you have always been one of the most intuitive, visionary kind of senior enlisted leaders. And you and I, all of our conversations all the time have focused on that last 50 meters to the objective and how well equipped, how fired up, and how well trained our troops are. And so to that, brother, I just love you. And thanks for being a guest here today. And hey, man, I'd like to bring you back and we'll get on a lighter subject here down the line. Love to get you back on Leader Talk, brother.
Yeah, well, thank you for this, John. And again, for everybody who's listening, just know me and John are here to help, man. We're like the rest of y'all, the majority of which wore a uniform at one place and time. And, if we have a voice or a way to reach out to those leaders to better take care of those men and women that are still in uniform, the 1% that opt to wear it, 1% of our population will do that. Everybody stay safe with this COVID Delta variant that's out here. Stay healthy, stay safe, and continue to pray for those men and women.
Thank you. And hey, just to our audience, Thursday night, I'll be back with another Leader Talk. My guest, the topic is holistic health and fitness. We're going to talk about that. And my guest is the First Corps Surgeon, Colonel Marcus Hurd. And I want to talk about what's going on with H2F, the ACFT, and the direction we're going. So please tune in on Thursday night. Go to the Veterans Lending Group page, sign up, register. Let's have a conversation about H2F. I'd love to hear your opinion about that and the ACFT as we move forward. For Chris Greca and our show's producer, Victoria Johnson, thank you all for tuning in to Leader Talk, powered by Veterans Lending Group. We'll see you all Thursday night. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.